This story happened about 12 years ago when I was only 16. At that age, I had no parental control. My mother just wasn't interested in it, and my father knew that my mother made the rules. This led to me getting involved with the wrong company. At 16, I was socializing with people who were well into their 20s. Now that I'm older, I realize how stupid and dangerous that is. In general, I was the kind of person who always wanted to fit in. I didn't like to show weakness towards these older guys. So, one night, the older girl in the group suggested we go camping at a place she had found a few weeks earlier during her camping trip. Everyone immediately agreed, and I managed to tell my mom that I wasn't coming home that night and was going to my friend's house. Once that was done, we got all the camping gear we needed out of the basement. There were 4 of us, and we all went together. The girl failed to mention that the place she had chosen was almost 3 hours away, and it was already 6 in the evening. Of course, everyone was annoyed by this misunderstanding, but I, as the youngest, just shut up and immersed myself in the book I had brought with me. After a while, we came to a deserted road where Spanish moss was hanging from weeping willows. It was like a still from a movie. After stopping the car, we grabbed our stuff and followed it into the woods. The forest was overgrown and there seemed to be no trail. There were no houses in the area, and we didn't see any cars for miles, which only added to our feeling of loneliness. The girl stopped, and we almost all pressed up against her. In front of us was a clearing surrounded by trees. The grass was shorter there, and it looked more inviting than the forest we had just passed through. Using the small Coleman flashlight we had brought with us, we began to set up the huge 6-person tent we had decided to take with us. Once it was set up, we dragged our sleeping bags inside and set up camping chairs around the tent. One of the guys built a small fire, and by 10:15 we were ready to go. The girl had brought her alcohol with her in a huge bag, which she kept clutched to her chest and stomach. As we all settled around, the guy she was with offered to tell scary stories. They claimed it was an initiation ritual. I didn't care much about anything, so I didn't mind when the girl pulled a Ouija board, a pendulum, and several black candles with miniature candlesticks out of her bag. If this had happened in any other situation, they would have been fascinating. But as soon as I realized what was happening, cold goosebumps swept over me. I wasn't particularly religious, but I didn't want to witness this in practice. The rest of us resorted to alcohol in hopes of bravery and eagerly awaited the developments. I refused to touch the tablet. Of course, they mocked me for a while, but the smiles on their faces were quickly replaced by a serious expression. I sat quietly in the chair and watched as they plugged in the device and touched it with their fingers. The girl started the conversation and asked the usual question, "Is anyone there?" Everyone held their breath, waiting for an answer. 2, 3, 4 minutes passed, but nothing happened. It was unnoticeable at first, but it was clear from their reactions that the tablet had begun to move. They exchanged glances, and now I was looking at them too. They assumed it was one of the band members. As they shouted, the tablet moved again. I couldn't hear everything. The others, stunned, started asking more questions to the board, and the movement indicated that someone wanted to continue the conversation. The answers were short and sweet. The girl who came up with this brilliant idea was ready to believe at any moment that it was all just a joke, and she decided to crap on the board. I tried to warn her that it's probably not a good idea to communicate with potential spirits because there are so many ways things can go wrong, but she ignored me. She called the board stupid and weak, said that someone who talks is worthless if they can barely formulate a long sentence. In all this time, the board never responded once, but in the next few minutes it showed us something much worse. The girl kept saying nasty things, and most of us had already lost interest. But what got us interested was when she froze in the middle of a sentence and her face changed expression. Her eyes widened to the size of a $50, and her lower lip quivered. She seemed to be on the verge of tears. The guy next to her leaned over to see what was going on, but she just stared through him into the emptiness that lurked in the woods. When his face was almost in front of hers, she let out a piercing scream, as if she had seen the devil himself. She began shaking her head from side to side in panic and repeating that they were coming. The others, trying to realize what was happening to this girl, smelled the smell of sulfur. 2 of them began waving their arms frantically. 3 of the 4 people here were losing their minds. I stood there trying to figure out what was happening to them, since I was the only one who was still okay. One of the guys whispered with a concerned look that they had to write something on the board before anything else could happen. Quickly, as soon as they touched the surface of the board, he began to write 2 letters, "Run." He repeated this several times. In the 3rd stage, the girl who had seen the strange vision suddenly jumped up and whispered that there was someone there. She then abruptly changed her running direction and disappeared from sight instantly. Her boyfriend also ran away, and the rest of us stood around trying to figure out what to do. I decided to stay where I was and wait, but from far away, among the trees, another scream was heard. Thinking that someone might be in danger, we all rushed into the woods. My only means of defense was pepper spray, but I wasn't about to go completely unarmed. We made our way through the thick foliage, and when we got out the other side, I saw a couple on the ground. He was holding her ankle, and she was laying on a root sticking upward out of the ground. After waiting for the guy to convince the hysterical woman to let go of him to bring her back, I decided to pass the time and started wandering aimlessly around the neighborhood. My goal was simple, just to diversify the weight. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but as I stepped and took a closer look at the outline of a building sticking out from behind the dense vegetation, my ankle nearly twisted as the ground suddenly disappeared beneath my feet. As I stumbled, I barely managed to stay on my feet. Taking the small flashlight we had brought with us out of my pocket, I lit up the space around me in a semicircle. It was then that I realized the mistake everyone else had made that night. This depression in the ground was nothing but a grave pit. It lay in an embankment, around which were broken and shattered tombstones, stacked in disarray. I tried to drown out my fears and convince myself that they were just pet tracks, but a closer look at the worn inscriptions made it clear that these were soldiers buried here during the Civil War. Suddenly, the very strange thought of the dead lying here overwhelmed me and my companions. However, I was the only one who did not feel threatened. My main concern was that someone was inappropriately offending the deceased. Not that I was dragging some kind of threat behind me, but the others were also beginning to lose hope of freedom and safety. It was so bad that when I suggested we go back the same way we had come, everyone radically refused. They insisted on taking the direct route and believed that if there was a cemetery here, the road must be very near. Fortunately, it turned out to be so. As we approached the end of the cemetery, we noticed that nature had already reclaimed the wooden steps. Descending them with wild fervor, we finally came to the road. Just at the bottom of the steps, I saw a vines overgrown plaque. It attested to the historical heritage of the place and stated that this was the site of a 19th century cemetery. There had been a town in the area, but it had been completely burned down during the Civil War and never revived. Only this corner of the land remains. After traveling about half a mile, we walked back down the road to our car. Many years have passed and I still don't know what happened to that girl. She stopped attending parties and pretty much disappeared from our lives altogether. She never told any of us what happened to her that night. The only explanation I can think of is that I didn't touch the tablet, which rules out a problem with me. But maybe I'll never know the truth. I came across a great deal on a campground in the woods near a small lake at Aspen Trails Campground, and impatiently made a reservation. This campground had 50 comfortable sites, each with campfire rings, picnic tables, and tent sites. There were also toilets, showers, and a store. I arrived at the campground in the afternoon and set up my tent at site number 13. This site was a bit isolated from the others, but I liked to enjoy the privacy and the beautiful view of the lake. After a while, I decided to look around and maybe make some new acquaintances with other travelers. As I walked around, I noticed that most of the sites were vacant. Only a few tents and RVs were standing around. Perhaps people had gone camping or fishing, or maybe they had decided to leave early. I shrugged my shoulders and continued my walk. A few minutes later, I came across a couple sitting outside their van. They looked friendly, so I greeted them and introduced myself. They said they called themselves Bob and Sue, and that they were visiting from Denver. I inquired if they knew why the campground was so quiet. Their answer surprised me. They said it had to do with local rumors. I asked what kind of rumors, and they exchanged nervous glances, whereupon Bob spoke up. "Listen, strange things have been happening around here lately. Some people say they've seen or heard something in the woods at night, something big and hairy, something that, you know. I laughed and said it sounded like a classic Bigfoot story, but they didn't believe the joke. They reported that it wasn't a joke and that some people were missing in the forest. Local authorities have investigated, but they have no evidence or suspects. They explained that they were going to leave the next day and advised me to do the same. I thanked them for the warning, but stated that I did not believe in such things. I believe there is always a logical explanation, and I am not afraid of imaginary monsters. I said that I would stay at the campground for 3 more nights and that I was eager to explore the neighborhood. They shrugged and wished me luck. I said goodbye and continued my walk. I thought they were just paranoid and superstitious trying to scare me. I thought they were aimlessly wasting time and money by leaving early. I thought for sure I was smarter and braver than they were. I was wrong. That night, as I lay in my tent, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and slow, crunching on leaves and branches. I thought it was probably a deer or a bear and that it would soon be gone. I try to ignore it and fall asleep again. But the noise doesn't stop. It gets louder and louder until it's right in front of my tent. I hear a low growl and feel hot breath on the fabric. Suddenly, I feel a rush of fear and grab my flashlight. I turn it on and point the light at the wall of the tent, hoping to scare away whatever is in there. I wish I hadn't done that. When I turn on the flashlight, I see a silhouette, a dark figure blocking the light. It's huge, at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. The figure looks human-like, but is covered in thick fur. She has a large head and stands on 2 legs, towering over me like a nightmare. Her face is more animal than human. I thought she was going to kill me. But after a minute or so, she turns and slowly walks away. I still don't know what it was. Maybe Bigfoot, but I don't believe in such a thing. While I've always liked the idea of going camping in my own camper, this trip in particular appealed to me. I envisioned it as a fun and adventurous way to explore new places and enjoy nature. I packed everything I needed, stocked up on food and water, and hit the road. The first few days were amazing. I traversed scenic routes, visited cozy towns, and pitched my tent in beautiful places. I felt boundless freedom and thoroughly enjoyed the lack of stress and the hustle and bustle of the city. I didn't have a clear plan. I just followed my instincts and the directions on the road signs. On day 5, I decided to drive deeper into the woods. After seeing a sign for a national park that piqued my interest, I thought it would be wonderful to spend the night in the wilderness, amongst the trees. I continued driving for several hours until I reached a dirt road leading to the park entrance. I paid the entrance fee, got my card, and drove inside. The park turned out to be huge and mostly empty. I noticed a few cars and campers, but they were far apart. I drove around the area looking for a suitable place to stop my camper. I wanted to be close to a lake or river. I wanted to enjoy the view and have access to water. Finally, I found the perfect spot on the edge of the park. It was a small clearing next to a creek, where there was a campfire and a picnic table. There was no one around, and the nearest road was about a mile away. I parked my camper, got out, and stretched out. The breeze was blowing playfully in my face, and I could hear the sound of the water and birds singing. I felt calm and relaxed. I checked the time and weather on my phone. It was 6 p.m., and the sun was already starting to hide behind the horizon. The weather forecast said the night would be clear and cold, with a temperature of about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I put on my jacket and turned off my phone. Built a fire, cooked dinner, and enjoyed it at the picnic table. I watched as the sky changed from blue to shades of pink and purple, and the stars appeared in the sky. Feeling the chill in the air, I moved closer to the fire. So, having checked the time and the weather forecast on my smartphone, making sure it was 6 o'clock in the evening, I looked around the volumes of the old 3-room apartment illuminated by the semicircle of the old kerosene lamp. The furnishings in the apartment were a rocking chair for my mother in drape with broken springs, long curtains and green teardrops and chocolate braids with unbearability, and a closet for the children. All in all, it was quiet and cozy, and we felt calm and safe. Suddenly, however, I woke up feeling eerily wary and anxious. I couldn't say exactly what woke me up, but I had a premonition of trouble. I listened, trying to hear any sound around me. Other than the sound of the creek and the chirping of crickets, I heard nothing else. I tried to calm down and told myself that these were just idle thoughts. Closed my eyes again and tried to sleep, but then I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. They came from outside my camper. Someone was walking slowly and quietly around me. I froze, held my breath, and hoped these people would just walk away and leave me alone. But then I heard another sound. A whisper. It was coming from outside. Someone was talking to each other quietly and almost without a trace. I couldn't make out what they were talking about, but I was sure there were at least 2 people there. You could tell from the voices that they were men, and it seemed that their intentions were far from honorable. Panic began to encompass me, and I quickly ran to the front of the camper, started it up, and left the place.